Well, good morning, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Season 2020 update, part of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion for August 25th, 2020, recorded around 9:16 a.m. Eastern Time. Right now, we'll be solely focusing today on Hurricane Laura and what impacts it is going to bring to the Gulf Coast states. So first and foremost, yes, this did become a hurricane overnight and early this morning with sustained winds of about 65 knots or 75 miles per hour, with gusts up to 80 miles per hour, pressure down to 991 millibars, and it's moving west-northwest here at about 17 miles per hour. This is still bringing some impacts towards Cuba, and as such, there is still a tropical storm warning that remains in effect for some of the Cuba areas. So this is going to remain in effect. There is going to be some impacts still today to Cuba, and we'll look at that here in a moment. This is now expected to become a major hurricane upon landfall in towards the Gulf Coast states, basically the southwest Gulf Coast states. And again, our main focus here is mainly focusing on western Texas into Louisiana for the most likely landfall point. Basically, western Louisiana and through western Texas, or eastern Texas rather, seems to be the focus for where this is going to make landfall, and this could be a fairly significant hurricane on approach into those areas. Now, if we take a look here at the visible satellite imagery from tropicaltidbits.com, well, this kind of buffers up here a little bit. Should be done. There we go. So we can kind of see that we have a much more defined structure today than we did the last few days. You notice that there is even some impacts towards the northern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula from these rain bands that are kind of circulating. No tropical storm watches or warnings for the Yucatan Peninsula, but there is still some tropical storm warnings for the Cuban coastline in this general vicinity, and that is because these heavier rain bands on the right front side is going to continue to produce very heavy rain and gusty conditions, and even some storm surge all the way back and through here. And not much, but there certainly will be some. You can definitely see that we have a much more defined center of circulation today, sitting about here. But you notice what's kind of lurking off towards the north. We do have some dry air and also some of that northerly shear, because the remnants of Marco and basically what you're getting also is in the low levels, you're getting a northwesterly flow, but at the basically the mid levels, you're getting an easterly flow. So if you kind of draw these shear vectors out almost, you kind of get something much like that, and you get a little bit of a shear component. And if you kind of take the difference of that is northerly shear that is being impinged right now on Laura. So that's hampering the structure a little bit, but that shear is going to start to abate as we kind of progress through time. And right now it seems to be strengthening fairly well, and it's actually strengthening beyond what we thought, because if you remember, this was not supposed to become a hurricane until tomorrow. Now it's a hurricane already, and probably well on its way to becoming a major hurricane. Now, if we take a look here at the reconnaissance aircraft that was in there, or that is still in there right now, so this is the Air Force reconnaissance aircraft. They are flying into the center of Laura, and you can see that we have even tropical storm force winds well out in advance of even where the deeper convection is. But you can see as they start to enter this area, some hurricane force flight level winds up to roughly near about 75 knots. That's probably about 77 to 76 knots of flight level wind, and roughly about 65 knots of surface winds of the step frequency microwave radiometer. That's the SFMR readings off the aircraft. And what that suggests is that we actually have hurricane force winds at the surface. Basically, the SFMR readings are basically derived from the whitecaps on the ocean. And, there's different scientific measurements and calculations that go into that. But the baseline is that this is a hurricane, and this is going to continue to strengthen over the next couple of days. And the recon plane from the NOAA Air Force, or the NOAA recon plane that was in there, continues to find lower pressures. I'm actually going to look here to see what they found. So they are looking at about 990. So this does suggest about 989. Yeah, 989.0 here. So this is suggesting that we have a strengthening storm, pressures down to roughly about 990 to 989 millibars. And that is likely to continue as we progress throughout today, that we are going to continue to get a strengthening cyclone. And that is going to impacts to the coastline. Now we can see kind of where this is going to end up going. This is as of basically the 8 a.m. intermittent advisory from the National Hurricane Center. We have a couple of changes today to the overall forecast pattern. First of all, this is now expected obviously to remain a hurricane and rapidly strengthen as it enters into its most favorable position in the Gulf of Mexico. By here, it is a Category 2, and by landfall point, it's nearing a major Category 3 hurricane. There is hurricane watches from just near Galveston, Texas, all the way through portions of central Louisiana, with tropical storm watches all the way through near the rest of the Louisiana coastline, but this does not include New Orleans or any of that. So for you folks there, again, though you will have some impacts, you will not have significant impacts. The hurricane watches only extend throughout most of central Louisiana at this point. It does not include New Orleans at all. But basically, if you are waiting to kind of make your move on where this center is going to make landfall, I want to caution you, because what's going to end up happening is obviously you're going to be in the right front quadrant. If you're over here to the east side of the storm, you're on the right front quadrant, and that's going to pile up the storm surge really in this area. It's going to pile up that storm surge on that right front quadrant, and that's also going to produce some tornadoes all the way over into potentially even near basically Gulfport, Mississippi, and Biloxi, Mississippi, all the way through New Orleans, even maybe Pensacola, Florida. You could see some of those outer rain bands that could be producing water spouts and tornadoes. The greatest storm surge potential is going to be west of New Orleans, around this area. But again, this whole entire area is very vulnerable to storm surge, and there will be a net increase in some of the coastal flooding over the next few days, even if you are not in the tropical storm or hurricane watches at the current moment. For folks over here towards Galveston and Houston, you need to be monitoring, because what we found out today earlier is that there is a slightly stronger ridge of high pressure off towards the east of the storm, and that might help to actually build the ridge in a little bit further and shift this further towards the west. So there's really a range of possibilities at this time frame for where this thing could really be. So anywhere really from Houston and Galveston, Texas, all the way through mostly all of coastal Louisiana, basically south of New Orleans, needs to be paying attention to the progress of Laura. And even if you are inland over New Orleans or Lafayette or Baton Rouge, there is going to be impacts regarding heavy rain, flooding, isolated tornadoes, etc. This right front quadrant, this is going to be a little bit of a larger storm, so this right front quadrant is going to be resultingly a little bit bigger. And that's what I kind of want to emphasize, is that this is going to bring very significant impacts to those areas over the next few days. Storm surge, heavy rain, that is the biggest and number one leading killer in tropical cyclones. So it's very important that you take this very, very seriously as time progresses. Now, one thing we can look at here to help us get a better understanding of the track and intensity is the HWRF model. This is the Hurricane Weather Research and Forecast model designed and developed specifically to look at hurricanes. Nothing else but hurricanes. And we can kind of see here that this is starting off at its initial. This is right now about 8 o'clock this morning. And again, it's forecasting a pressure, or had a pressure of about 988. So that's close to what we're seeing, with surface winds of roughly about 63 knots. So that's pretty close to what we're seeing. You can notice, though, we get a fairly significant increase down to 979 by tonight at only about 8 o'clock, down to 978, 979. That continues to strengthen, and then approaching on very early Thursday morning, we get a landfall somewhere along either the Texas Gulf Coast or the Texas-Louisiana border, somewhere in this vicinity in through here, we're going to have a landfall. Notice this is where the core is right here. That's where the strongest winds are going to be positioned, right in here. But you notice that there is still a fairly significant onshore flow around the edge of this cyclone, and that is going to help to drive some of those storm surge values well east of that center. So it's very important to understand, if you're east of the center, that you do not write this storm off. And again, you can kind of see that if we turn it to the radar, you can clearly see that those training bands are going to be positioned in that right front quadrant, while the western quadrant isn't, all that intense back in this vicinity. This is the dry quadrant. This is the moist quadrant, basically. But that really strengthens it down to pretty much a Category 4 hurricane on this particular model run, making landfall somewhere either near Texas or Louisiana, somewhere along here. And it is entirely possible that it could ride both these borders all the way up here before kind of turning north and east. So very important to understand, this is going to have large impacts even further inland as time progresses. The UK Met model, which has been doing fairly good with the track so far of this cyclone, shows a landfall point right here about 951 millibars along the Texas-Louisiana border. Tropical storm conditions all the way through Galveston and Houston, Texas. That is going to be something to kind of keep in mind as time progresses. And you notice this onshore flow is going to be very prominent even far away from the center of the storm. So what we're going to end up having is some storm surge potential even far out in advance right now of Laura, and that's going to be very problematic for an area that is very susceptible to storm surge along this general vicinity. So if we look here at the 850 millibar relative vorticity product from the Central University of Wisconsin-Madison site, these reds and whites at your higher cyclonic spin at the 5,000 foot level, and you can very clearly tell that we have a very well-defined cyclone in through here, very well-defined, nice rounded piece of energy in the atmosphere, and that is likely to continue as time progresses and only continue to intensify further into what is likely to be the Atlantic Basin's first major hurricane. This is actually the remnants right here of once was Hurricane Marco, which is now a remnant circulation in the Gulf of Mexico. These two systems may kind of interact, and this is going to produce maybe some heavier rainfall over the next few days, already inducing some maybe flooding concerns on top of what might happen here with Hurricane Laura. And real quickly, that uprush and heat content numbers, we talked about how this was going to matter in the very beginning of the season, and now it's really coming to fruition. We talked about it before, and I hate to kind of say I told you so, but this is what we were talking about. And we had a kind of a cyclone that kind of came through this region, is able to kind of hold together over the very mountainous terrain. There is going to be a little bit of a cooler eddy right here, but what's going to end up happening is this is moving kind of parallel or perpendicular to that, rather. So it's not going to have much time over this very narrow stretch. And also the skin temperatures are about 30 to 31 Celsius, meaning that because of this fast motion, it's not going to have a lot of time to upwell these cooler waters. So that's going to be very important for the eventual landfall point somewhere along the Texas-Louisiana border entirely. So again, a lot we have to watch here over the next couple of days. Forecasting a landfall somewhere by Thursday, somewhere along the Texas-Louisiana border here. So again, for you folks, this is going to be a very dangerous situation. You need to take all the evacuation orders seriously. If you are told to evacuate, even if it's a voluntary evacuation, do it. It's best to be safe than sorry. And, we can always replace property, but we can't replace the life, and do not become a statistic. All right? With that being said, have a great rest of your morning and afternoon and evening. I am working till roughly about from 3 to 10 this evening, so there is a very slim chance that I'll be able to do any updates here on YouTube after about 10 o'clock. But in the event, I will be doing a live stream, and I will be doing a live stream shortly after this video goes public. All right? That being said, have a great rest of your morning and afternoon and evening. I'll talk to you guys some more either with another video updates tomorrow, or I will be doing a live stream here in a little bit. See you then, folks.